Police Training Podcast with Justin Delisio.
Police training, martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Here's your host, Justin Delisio. Hello everyone, I hope all is well. My name is Justin Delisio and I am a senior student at Newman University. At this point, I have been going through the Communications and Digital Media program for 3.5 years, and come May it will be 4, which means I will be graduating from Newman. I'm very close to the finish line, but there's still much work to be done, including the creation of this podcast right here. This semester, I am taking a course titled Communication Arts Seminar. It's instructed by Dr. Janis Chalkers, one of the finest instructors in all of the land and a personal favorite of mine. This course is billed as the final step before graduation. We have, 8 students, all of which are seniors. In this course, Dr. Chalkers has assigned us a final media project. This is our chance to combine all of the different knowledge and skills that we have learned throughout the CDM program and put it together one more time. He gave us endless possibilities. We have so much freedom with this project, and I want to thank Dr. Chalkers for that. This isn't just a project, however. This is our chance to make at least one more footprint during our time remaining here at Newman. This is our chance to create something meaningful. This is a project by us, for us. I have experience working for organizations such as the Philadelphia Phillies and the Golf Association of Philadelphia. With these companies, I've gained great experience in working events, magazine writing, digital creation, including some articles published strictly for the web, such as recaps, photography, etc. My initial thought was to do a project about baseball or golf, and maybe I could have used some of the resources I have built up with those two companies and I've worked closely with, but I instead decided to take a different path. Police training is a topic that I have always thought about internally and debated myself countless times on the subject. Now keep in mind, I have never had any intentions to become an officer. I never will have those intentions, but I do have my own thoughts and opinions on the matter. And when it comes to police training, I have always thought that officers need to be trained in martial arts, and in specific Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do not know the exact percentages, but I can say that the vast majority of officers are not trained in martial arts. So in this podcast, which I have decided to simply call the Police Training Podcast with Justin Delisio, I will be focusing on the two topics of police training and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It will probably be a bit heavier on the police training side because, face it, learning BJJ will not solve all of the problems that police officers have, but I think it's a good start. I think it's an important skill for them to have in their arsenal. I think if every officer knew Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or at least some other form of martial arts, many lives would be saved as a result. One of the reasons I chose this topic is because police and some of their training strengths and more so weaknesses have constantly been in the news really since as long as I can remember, but especially even more so in 2020. I just mentioned saving lives. That brings me to this statistic that I have unshamelessly pulled from Billy Hunt, a fellow CDM student in our program, and this was part of his communications research project. 223, 209, 235, and as of September 16th, 2020, 123 African Americans have lost their life due to a police encounter. And this is just the past 4 years. That adds up to 790 African Americans, and unfortunately, that number will be higher by December 31st. That is just African Americans. At the current moment, I haven't even factored in the numbers of other races, but if I did so, the death count would obviously be a lot higher. Now, it's important to note that I, nor any other analyst, were present for every single situation. Who knows what went down? But no logical person could say that the active officer was correct in every single situation. Even if 789 deaths could be considered justified, which most certainly is not the case, but even if it was, one life lost is way too many. I think just by looking at the death numbers alone kind of proves that police officers could use more training. I think almost every down-to-earth professional in any field would say that they could use more training. So I don't want this to seem as if I'm knocking or trying to insult officers. But not every job is as important in this sense as police officers. Their duty is to keep citizens protected and make them feel safe. But it seems as if the opposite is happening. People are scared shitless of the police, and I want that to change. I'm sure those of you listening want that to change as well. And change is what has to happen. Just about anyone could become a cop. My buddy Jim Bob from high school could go down to Delaware County Community College and easily pursue a career in this field. Now, obviously, it isn't quite that easy. There is an application process. Applicants are typically required to pass a reading exam, physical exam, drug screening, background checks, and medical evaluations. The application process could take a couple months before you get into the academy. Then officers get into the academy, and obviously there are critics of the academy. This is where applicants will now report to take classes in firearms, first aid, criminal law, emergency vehicle operations, defense tactics, physical fitness, and report writing. The average officer will spend 21 to 30 weeks in the academy, somewhere between 800 to 900 hours. 21 weeks of training, then you get your badge and your firearm. But that's not all. A typical officer will be paired with a more experienced officer for additional on-the-job training. On-the-job training with a firearm right by your side. What I've been getting at is that I believe that some officers are already undertrained in the first place. And now you're telling me that one of these undertrained officers are now responsible for giving on-the-job training to another young and potentially undertrained officer? Let's discuss the case that has really been the biggest story of 2020. The passing of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 25, 2020. Officers were called in to deal with the situation involving Mr. Floyd. Apparently, he tried to use counterfeit money to purchase something. The veteran officer on duty was an officer by the name of Derek Chauvin, who has been on the job for 17 years. There were 3 officers also at the spot where Mr. Chauvin, 2 of which trained at the academy together and were in their first week on the job when Mr. Floyd passed away. So Mr. Floyd may have potentially used illegal bills to purchase his items, and the clerk obviously wasn't happy about that, so he called the cops. The cops arrived, knocked on Floyd's car window because that's where he's sitting now. He's sitting right in his car, right across the street from the convenience store. Floyd initially was a bit off guard. Maybe he was not complying. The officers instructed him several times to show his hands. The officer pulled his gun and at one point, but eventually it got to the point where he could put it back in the holster and get Mr. Floyd in the handcuffs. The officers sat Mr. Floyd down on the curb. They suspected he was on drugs. Mr. Floyd said he was simply scared. They go to arrest him, and Floyd was short of breath. He said he just recovered from COVID-19. He's scared, nervous, anxious, claustrophobic, and he didn't really want to go into the back of the cop car. Now, obviously, when you're under arrest, you don't get to make the rules. But still, maybe it could have been possible to work with Mr. Floyd and make him feel comfortable enough and officially transport him to jail. But that's not what happened. We're at a point now where Floyd is still handcuffed and he's down on the sidewalk. This is where Officer Chauvin enters the scene, and now he takes force. Floyd is lying on his chest and his cheek is on the ground. Officer Chauvin is now kneeling on Floyd's neck, and this went on for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. One officer is pressuring Floyd's torso, another is on his legs, and one officer is standing around trying to control the crowd. There's multiple videos of the incident from multiple cameras and perspectives. You can literally hear Mr. Floyd say that he couldn't breathe multiple times throughout these 8 minutes and 20 seconds. It got to a point where Floyd maybe was conscious at the moment, but he could no longer move. There's multiple witnesses around, by the way, and one of the witnesses even said to the officer that Floyd is no longer, he's not resisting anymore, and they should do something else, maybe something safer. To which the officer responded, nah, he's talking, he's fine. But Mr. Floyd wasn't fine. He was in pain. He was scared. And at 8:25, he was unconscious and later pronounced dead. Officer Chauvin is potentially facing charges of second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. If you're listening to this right now, I'm sure you've seen the video of the encounter between Mr. Floyd and Officer Chauvin. If you have not, I encourage you to go on YouTube and watch it. You don't have to watch the whole thing. I know it might make you feel uneasy, but I think it's important to see what Chauvin was doing. When I look at the video, it looks to me that Chauvin is inexperienced in person-to-person combat. It's time for another disclaimer. I am not some sort of martial arts wizard. I do not train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at this moment, and that will certainly be the case for at least the near future. I am a fan of martial arts and jiu-jitsu. I love the practices. I enjoy watching it. I know how valuable of a skill it is to know. You might be thinking, why is this gentleman doing a podcast about police training and jiu-jitsu when he's never practiced either of them? But guess what? It's 2020. You can make a podcast about anything you want. But anyhow, it immediately looks like Floyd is in great danger. In martial arts, there are strangleholds and there are chokeholds. These two terms may sound the same, but there actually is a difference between the two. A stranglehold is where circulation of the blood to a part of the body is cut off by constriction. A choke is where there is severe difficulty breathing because your throat is constricted, therefore there's a lack of air. Chauvin put Floyd in a very poorly applied stranglehold. If he was trained in jiu-jitsu, he could have applied a stranglehold for 20 seconds, properly restrained Floyd, no damage would have been done to him. It's a 1-on-4 situation. How scared could you possibly be? You apply a proper hold on him and it's settled. He's not going to fight back or run away after that. From research, I know that different police academies are taught different chokeholds. Why is that the case? Why can't we get skilled Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructors to train officers in different techniques? Every department should be producing officers with the same knowledgeable skill set. We can tell that Officer Derek Chauvin isn't properly trained in Jiu-Jitsu. He's not alone. That's a common occurrence amongst active officers. Ari Kay, a BJJ black belt instructor and former enforcement officer, actually ran a study to find out why officers aren't training in martial arts. 1,500 officers took part in this survey that Mr. K constructed. Again, 1,500 officers who are not training participated in this survey, and 86% were officers who have been on the job for at least 6 years. Those are the same guys giving on-the-job training to these new rookies. And because of that, there's a greater chance we have situations like the one involving George Floyd. Derek Chauvin, a 17-year veteran untrained in BJJ or any other form of martial arts, paired with 2 rookies in their first week, are now wrestling with a citizen. They also looked into some of the reasons as to why officers aren't training. 78% cited lack of time as a reason. They have busy schedules, they're always busy with work, and they'd like to spend time with their families when they can, which are very fair points. But why don't police departments set aside time for these officers to train? How about we take the time spent doing on-the-job training and donate some of that to committing to training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Cost was another popular excuse. Again, very valid for an officer to have this concern, given they typically are not paid too handsomely to begin with. First of all, I want to give a shout out to an organization called Adopt a Cop BJJ. This is a foundation that helps provide police officers with free Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu memberships by allowing citizens to sponsor officers. They're affiliated with hundreds of gyms across the country. I love the work that they do. Their handle on Instagram is @AdoptACopBJJ, if you would like to check them out and learn more. But again, I can see why officers would be concerned with price. Obviously, Adopt a Cop cannot sponsor every officer. We know how big police budgets are. An average city spends anywhere from 25 to 45% of their budget on their police departments. That's why we've been hearing a lot of citizens calling to defund the police. I don't know if that's possible or logical, but we can certainly call for them to spend their budget better, and I think they should spend more on training. Another common answer was fear of injury. That's a bullshit excuse to me. I apologize, but I cannot buy that for 1 second. You're a police officer, and you don't train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because you're scared of an injury? With a job that dangerous, I'm almost certain you're more scared patrolling the dangerous streets. What's even more scary is if you find yourself in a position where person-to-person combat is necessary, and you have no idea what to do. I'm sure Officer Chauvin is scared right now facing those charges. This next headline that I'm about to read comes from the New York Times. Confidence in the police is at a record low, survey finds. From the survey they conducted, they have concluded that just 48% of people trust the police. That's down 5 points from last year. 56% of Caucasian people say they trust the police, whereas just 19% of African Americans say that they trust the police. Talk about a disconnect. A survey run by Pew shows that just 62% of Philadelphians say they have at least a good amount of respect for their police department. This number is down from 72% in 2016. I have to edit this in here, but here I am after that statistic, and an unfortunate event happened in West Philadelphia. Walter Wallace, a 27-year-old African American, was shot by the police and later passed away. I don't want to go into the whole story, but a pretty popular opinion is that the police did a horrible job with de-escalation tactics. Mr. Wallace reportedly suffered from mental illness. He did have a knife. The officers do believe that Mr. Wallace was charging at them. But a gun versus a knife? That's the most unfair fight I've seen since Mike Tyson punched Allen in The Hangover. The officers were not carrying tasers. I don't know why. I do think death could have been avoided in this situation. But there you have it. Talk about hitting close to home. At this point, my feelings are clear. I hope the listeners have a good idea on what to expect as far as this topic and this podcast. I have planned for a couple guests to appear on the next 2 episodes, one being a martial arts instructor with experience in training officers, and the other being a criminal justice professor. Throughout this intro, you could hear me questioning some things. I'm hoping my guests could maybe help me answer those questions. Look, this is a two-way street. Any logical person should want to have a responsible police department that they feel comfortable protecting their city. We want these officers to be good enough so that we can trust them. We need a healthy relationship where the citizens respect the police respect the citizens. I think it's fair to say that as an overall unit, the police have earned the criticism that they have received, and I want nothing more for them to build back up our trust. It won't be easy, there's a lot of work to be done, and it could take a long time. But I'm pulling for them. I'm excited to work on this podcast. I think podcasting is so significant these days. They're easily accessible, most are free to listen to. It's a great chance to learn about a topic that you may not know too much about. Podcasts are taking over the digital media world. I started experimenting with podcasts last winter before Corona. I've always been strong at creating content, but one of my weaknesses was with my delivery. Podcasting is a way I can practice my delivery, and I enjoy doing it. That's a wrap for the intro. I'm looking forward to working on this. I hope you enjoyed the intro, and I hope you are looking forward to the rest of the series. Episode 2 will be coming soon, but until then, I'm signing off. Thank you.